The gravel crunched under Emily Parker's designer boots as she pulled up to the weathered mailbox bearing the faded letters, Parker Farm. She killed the engine of her rental car and sat there, staring at the sprawling farmhouse where her childhood summers had slowly faded into distant memories. Now, 20 years later, she was back, not for a nostalgic visit, but to finally close this chapter of her family's history. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the overgrown fields, painting everything in shades of amber and rust. Emily adjusted her silk blouse and checked her reflection in the rearview mirror, a habit born from years of high-stakes presentations to urban development boards. But here, surrounded by rolling hills and the earthy scent of farmland, her carefully curated city persona felt oddly out of place. "Just get it done, Em," she muttered to herself, retrieving her leather portfolio containing the preliminary development proposals. 3 major companies were already interested in the property, seeing the potential for luxury housing developments where her uncle saw only failing crops and mounting debt. It was the practical solution, the only solution, really. She'd convinced countless clients to embrace change, surely she could do the same with her own uncle. As she made her way up the creaking porch steps, movement caught her eye. A man was leaning against the fence line of the neighboring property, his stance suggesting he'd been watching her arrival. Even from this distance, his disapproval was palpable. He pushed off the fence and started walking toward her, his gait steady and purposeful. "You must be Robert's niece," he called out, his voice carrying across the yard. There was an edge to his tone that made Emily straighten her spine, squaring her shoulders as he approached. Up close, she could see the years of sun and hard work etched into his face, though he couldn't have been much older than her own 35 years. "Emily Parker," she replied, extending her hand professionally. "And you are?" "Jack Morrison. I work the farm next door." His handshake was firm, calloused palm rough against her manicured hand. "Word travels fast around here. Heard you were coming to help Robert sell the place." The accusation in his voice was unmistakable. Emily withdrew her hand, irritation flickering through her. "Uncle Robert asked for my help in exploring his options. The farm hasn't turned a profit in years." "No, because the banks and big corporations have made it impossible for family farms to survive," Jack countered, his blue eyes hardening. "But that's probably right up your alley, isn't it? Coming in with your fancy portfolio and promises of progress, turning generations of history into another soulless subdivision." Emily felt her professional mask slipping. "I don't need to justify my uncle's decisions to you, Mr. Morrison. This is a family matter." "Family?" Jack laughed, but there was no humor in it. "When was the last time you set foot on this farm, Ms. Parker? When was the last time you helped with a harvest or sat at your grandmother's table? Because I've been here, watching your uncle struggle alone while you built your shiny career in the city." The words hit home with unexpected force. Emily opened her mouth to deliver a scathing reply when the screen door creaked open behind her. "Emmy?" Her Uncle Robert appeared, looking older and more tired than she remembered. "Is that really you, sweetheart?" The genuine warmth in his voice made her throat tight. She turned away from Jack, forcing a smile. "Hi, Uncle Rob. Sorry I'm late." "Nonsense, you're right on time." He enveloped her in a hug that smelled of tobacco and old leather, just like she remembered. Over her uncle's shoulder, she could see Jack watching them, his expression unreadable. "I should get back to my place," Jack said, his tone notably softer when addressing Robert. "But this conversation isn't over, Ms. Parker. Some things are worth more than money." As he walked away, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just stepped into something far more complicated than a simple property sale. Her uncle's farm had always been more than just land, it was a repository of memories, of family history, of the stories her grandmother used to tell on warm summer evenings. But sentiment wouldn't pay the bills or secure her uncle's retirement. She followed Robert inside, the screen door banging shut behind them with a familiar sound that echoed through the years. The house was exactly as she remembered, down to the faded curtains and the collection of family photos on the wall. But now she saw it all through different eyes, calculating square footage, evaluating renovation costs, mentally positioning it all in her slick presentation slides. "Don't mind Jack," Robert said, settling into his worn armchair. "He's rough around the edges, but his heart's in the right place. Been a godsend these past few years, helping out when my health started failing." Emily set her portfolio on the kitchen table, guilt and determination warring in her chest. "Uncle Rob, we need to talk about the farm's future. I've had some interesting discussions with developers who dash." "There's something you should see first," Robert interrupted, reaching for an old shoebox on the side table. "Your grandmother left this for you. Said you'd know what to do with it when the time was right." The unexpected mention of her grandmother stopped Emily short. She stared at the shoebox, suddenly uncertain of everything she'd planned to say. Outside, the sun was setting over the fields her family had worked for generations, and somewhere in the distance, a dinner bell rang out across the valley, a sound straight from her childhood memories. Jack Morrison's words echoed in her mind, "Some things are worth more than money." She had come here to solve a problem, to broker a deal, to do what she did best. But as she reached for the shoebox, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing on the edge of a decision that would reshape far more than just the fate of Parker Farm. Emily's hands trembled slightly as she lifted the lid of the shoebox. The musty scent of aged paper wafted up, carrying with it memories of summer afternoons spent watching her grandmother write at the kitchen table, her graceful penmanship flowing across countless pages. Inside, dozens of letters were bundled together with faded ribbon, their edges softened by time. "She wrote these over the course of 50 years, Robert said quietly, watching his niece's face. "Started the day she and your grandfather bought this place. Said it was her way of keeping the farm story alive." The first letter was dated June 15, 1973. Emily's throat tightened as she recognized her grandmother's elegant handwriting. "Dearest ones. Today marks the beginning of our greatest adventure. When Thomas and I signed the papers for Parker Farm, we weren't just buying land, we were investing in a dream. These rolling hills will be our legacy, a piece of earth where our family can put down roots that will grow deeper with each passing generation." Emily's voice caught as she read aloud. She looked up to find her uncle wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. Outside, the day's last light painted the kitchen in soft gold, not unlike those long-ago evenings when her grandmother would tell stories of the farm's early days. A knock at the screen door made them both start. Jack Morrison stood there, holding a basket of fresh vegetables. "Evening, Robert. Thought you might want some of the summer harvest." His eyes fell on the letters in Emily's lap, and something flickered across his face, recognition, perhaps, or concern. "Come in, Jack," Robert called. "Emmy's just found her grandmother's letters." Jack stepped inside, setting the basket on the counter. His work-worn hands were stained with soil, and Emily noticed fresh scratches on his forearms, evidence of honest labor that made her own manicured fingers seem almost frivolous. He moved with the easy familiarity of someone who spent considerable time in this kitchen. "Margaret's letters," he said softly. "She used to read them to me sometimes, when I'd help her with the garden. Said they were her way of keeping the farm's heart beating." Emily felt a surge of irrational jealousy. This virtual stranger had shared moments with her grandmother that she'd missed, too busy building her career to visit more than once or twice a year. She pulled another letter from the box, this one from 1995. "The developers came again today, offering what they called life-changing money. But how do you put a price on sunrise over wheat fields, or the laugh of your granddaughter chasing fireflies at dusk? Some might call us foolish for turning them down, but Thomas and I believe that Parker Farm isn't just land to be bought and sold, it's the keeper of our family's stories, the guardian of our hopes." "Seems like nothing's changed," Jack commented, his voice carrying an edge that made Emily bristle. "Still developers circling like vultures, trying to turn working farms into concrete and asphalt. The situation is more complicated than that, Emily snapped, standing up. These letters are beautiful, but they don't change the reality of Uncle Robert's situation. The farm is failing. The equipment is outdated. The medical bills are piling up. Sometimes practical decisions have to trump sentiment. Practical? Jack stepped closer, his presence filling the small kitchen. Was it practical when your grandmother stayed up all night with my mother when she was sick, bringing soup and comfort? Was it practical when she taught me about crop rotation and soil health, passing on generations of farming wisdom? This land isn't just dirt and crops, Ms. Parker. It's community. It's heritage. It's Dash. It's not your decision to make, Emily cut him off, though her voice lacked its usual boardroom confidence. She turned to Robert. Uncle Rob, I have preliminary offers from 3 different developers. They're willing to pay well above market value, enough to set you up comfortably for Dash. There might be another way, Jack interrupted. His voice had changed, carrying an intensity that made both Emily and Robert look at him sharply. I've been working on something, a plan to modernize the farm while keeping its soul intact. If you'd just take the time to understand what this place could be Dash. I understand perfectly well what this place is, Emily retorted. A failing business that's draining my uncle's resources and health. I won't let sentimentality cloud my judgment, even if you Dash. Emmy, Robert's quiet voice stopped her. He was holding another letter, his hands shaking slightly. You should read this one. It's the last letter your grandmother wrote, dated just a week before she passed. The paper crinkled as Emily took it, her anger fading as she recognized the shakier handwriting of her grandmother's final days. My dearest Emily. I've watched you grow into a remarkable woman, so capable and strong. But strength comes in many forms, and success can be measured in ways that don't fit neatly into spreadsheets. When you read these letters, you'll be facing a choice, one that will test everything you believe about value and worth. Emily's vision blurred. She looked up to find Jack watching her, his expression softer than before. The kitchen suddenly felt too small, too crowded with memories and expectations and the weight of decisions yet to be made. I need some air, she mumbled, pushing past Jack and out onto the porch. The night air was heavy with the scent of summer grass and distant rain. Behind her, she could hear Jack and Robert talking in low voices, could imagine them sharing the easy rapport built over years of neighboring and mutual support. She pulled her grandmother's final letter from her pocket, but it was too dark to read. In the distance, lightning flickered, illuminating the fields that had sustained her family for generations. The land seemed to pulse with stories, not just her grandmother's carefully preserved letters, but the unwritten tales of countless seasons, of struggles and triumphs, of a way of life that was vanishing across America. A warm drop of rain hit her cheek, or perhaps it was a tear. Emily Parker, who prided herself on clarity and decisiveness, stood in the gathering storm, feeling the certainties of her mission beginning to crack like the drought-parched earth beneath her feet. Dawn broke over Parker Farm in streaks of pink and gold, finding Emily already awake, sitting at the kitchen window with her grandmother's letters spread before her. She hadn't slept much, spending most of the night reading through decades of family history, each page revealing a deeper connection to this land than she'd ever imagined. The sound of a tractor engine rumbling to life drew her attention. Through the morning mist, she could see Jack's silhouette against the horizon, already at work in the neighboring fields. Despite their heated exchange the previous evening, she found herself curious about his mentioned plan for modernizing the farm. He starts at dawn every day, Robert said, appearing behind her with 2 steaming coffee mugs. Been that way since he took over his family's farm at 23, after his father's accident. He handed her a mug, her grandmother's favorite, she noticed, with hand-painted violets around the rim. You never mentioned Jack's father, Emily said, accepting the coffee. What happened? Robert settled into his chair with a heavy sigh. Farming accident. Equipment was old, needed replacing, but times were tight. Jack dropped out of agricultural college to come home and save the farm. Could have had a different life, but he chose this one. Chose to honor his family's legacy, just like your grandmother did. Emily watched Jack's tractor move methodically across the field, remembering his words about community and heritage. Tell me more about his plan, she found herself saying. The one he mentioned last night. Why don't you ask him yourself? Robert suggested, a hint of his old mischief in his eyes. He'll be breaking for breakfast soon. Margaret's old boots are still in the mudroom if you want to see what farm life is really about. An hour later, Emily found herself walking across the dew-wet field, her grandmother's rubber boots squeaking with each step. She felt ridiculously out of place in her designer jeans and silk blouse, but something compelled her forward. Jack killed the tractor engine as she approached, his expression guarded. Didn't expect to see you out here, Miss Parker. Careful of your fancy clothes. Emily, she corrected, surprising them both. If we're going to talk about the farm's future, we might as well use first names. She took a deep breath. Show me your plan, Jack. Show me what you see when you look at this land. Something shifted in his face, surprise, followed by cautious hope. He jumped down from the tractor, landing with practiced ease. It'll be easier to show you than tell you. But it'll take time. You willing to spend a full day seeing how a modern farm really works? I have meetings scheduled with developers next week. One day, he interrupted. Give the farm one day before you decide its fate. The challenge in his voice sparked something in her, not irritation this time, but a strange sort of excitement. One day, she agreed. What followed was unlike anything in Emily's carefully ordered life. Jack showed her how modern farming technology could work in harmony with traditional methods: soil sensors that optimized water usage, drone mapping for precision planting, sustainable practices that could reduce costs while improving yields. See these saplings? He led her to a newly planted section of the property line. Heritage apple varieties. Your grandmother helped me plant them last spring. Part of a bigger plan for sustainable diversification, organic fruit, honey production, maybe even farm-to-table events. Emily found herself taking mental notes, her designer's mind already seeing possibilities. The old barn could be converted for events, she mused aloud. And that south field would be perfect for she caught herself, remembering she was supposed to be selling this place, not planning its future. But Jack had already seized on her interest. Exactly. The structures here have good bones. With some strategic renovations and the right marketing approach. He pulled out a worn notebook filled with calculations and sketches. I've been working on this business plan for months. The initial investment would be significant, but the potential return . Let me see that, Emily interrupted, her professional instincts kicking in. She spent the next hour going through his projections, impressed despite herself by the thoroughness of his research. These numbers could work, she admitted. But it would take time, and Uncle Robert needs solutions now. Some things are worth waiting for, Jack said quietly. He was standing close enough that she could smell hay and machine oil on his clothes, could see the flecks of gold in his eyes when the sun hit them just right. Your grandmother understood that. Every seed planted is an act of faith in the future. The day passed in a blur of activity. Jack taught her to drive the tractor, laughing at her initial clumsiness but praising her quick learning. They checked on newborn calves in the barn, their wobbly legs and trusting eyes making something twist in Emily's chest. She helped him repair a section of fence, her manicured hands growing dirty and scraped, but feeling strangely satisfied with the tangible results of their work. As the sun began to set, they sat on the tailgate of his truck, sharing a thermos of coffee and watching the day's last light paint the fields gold. Emily was exhausted, filthy, and more alive than she'd felt in years. Why do you care so much about saving our farm? She asked suddenly. You have your own land to worry about. Jack was quiet for a long moment, rolling the coffee cup between his palms. When my father died, your grandmother was the first person at our door. She brought food, yes, but more importantly, she brought hope. Told me stories about how her own parents survived the Dust Bowl, about how farming communities stick together through hard times. She taught me that these fields are more than just acres to be bought and sold, they're the threads that bind us all together. Emily thought about the letters in the shoebox, about her grandmother's vision of a legacy that went beyond profit margins and property values. She thought about the developers' offers waiting in her portfolio, promising quick solutions but demanding the soul of the land in return. I have another meeting with River Creek Development tomorrow, she said softly. They're prepared to make a very generous offer. Jack stiffened beside her, but before he could respond, a commotion erupted from the direction of the farmhouse. They both looked up to see Robert stumbling on the porch steps, clutching his chest. Uncle Rob. Emily was running before she consciously decided to move, her heart pounding with a fear that had nothing to do with property values or business decisions. Behind her, she could hear Jack calling 911, his voice steady but urgent. As they waited for the ambulance, holding Robert's hands and trying to keep him calm, Emily caught Jack's eye over her uncle's prone form. In that moment, she understood that some decisions weren't about business at all, they were about family, about community, about the kind of person you choose to become when faced with difficult choices. The ambulance's sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer with each passing second. Emily squeezed her uncle's hand, her grandmother's final letter burning in her memory like a promise waiting to be kept or broken. The hospital waiting room buzzed with fluorescent lights and muted conversations, a world away from the peaceful fields of Parker Farm. Emily sat with her head in her hands, her clothes still dirty from the day's farm work. Her phone buzzed again, another message from River Creek Development, reminding her of the morning's meeting. Coffee? Jack's voice made her look up. He stood there holding 2 paper cups, looking as exhausted as she felt. He'd followed the ambulance in his truck, staying through the long night of tests and worried consultations. Thanks, she murmured, accepting the cup. Their fingers brushed briefly, and she noticed his hands were trembling slightly. The doctor said he's stable. It was a minor heart attack, but... She swallowed hard. The medical bills. Don't, Jack said quietly. Not tonight. Just be grateful he's okay. Emily checked her phone again, 3:47 a.m. The meeting with River Creek was scheduled for 9 o'clock. In her portfolio, the developer's preliminary offer waited like a loaded gun, $5 million, well above market value, enough to pay off the farm's debts and cover Robert's medical care with plenty left over. I have to go back to the farm, she said suddenly. Need to change before the meeting. Jack's face hardened. You're still going through with it? After everything that's happened? What choice do I have? Emily stood up, anger and exhaustion making her voice sharp. You saw what happened tonight. Uncle Robert needs proper medical care, retirement security. The farm is drowning in debt. Your plan, beautiful as it is, would take years to implement. So you'll sell his legacy for a quick fix. Jack's voice was low but intense. Margaret's dreams, Robert's life work, all of it turned into another soulless housing development. Don't you dare question my motives, Emily hissed. You're not family. You don't get to judge my decisions. No. Jack stood too, his height forcing her to look up at him. I've been here every day for the past 5 years, helping Robert keep this farm alive while you built your perfect city life. Where were you when the bank threatened foreclosure last spring? When the drought almost killed the corn crop? When your grandmother was dying? The last words hit Emily like a physical blow. She took a step back, bumping into her chair. That's not fair, she whispered. Life isn't fair, Jack replied, running a hand through his disheveled hair. But that doesn't mean we stop fighting for what matters. Your grandmother understood that. She could have sold the farm a dozen times over, but she believed in something bigger than money. Belief doesn't pay medical bills, Emily said, but her voice lacked conviction. She thought of the day they'd just spent together, of the passion in Jack's voice as he shared his vision for the farm's future. For a moment, she'd seen it too, a thriving, modern operation that honored the past while embracing the future. "I have to go," she said finally. "The meeting dash." "Fine." Jack's voice was cold now. "Go sell your heritage to the highest bidder. But remember this moment, Emily. Remember that you had a choice." She fled the hospital, her grandmother's boots still caked with yesterday's mud sitting in her car's back seat. The drive back to the farm was a blur of pre-dawn darkness and troubled thoughts. As she showered and changed into her familiar business attire, charcoal suit, crisp white blouse, pearls her grandmother had given her for graduation, Emily tried to recapture her certainty from just days ago. The developers were waiting in the local diner, 3 men in expensive suits that somehow looked as out of place as she had felt in her silk blouse in the fields. They spread out glossy renderings across the formica table, beautiful images of luxury homes and manicured lawns where cornfields now stood. "Miss Parker, we're prepared to increase our offer," Richard Coleman, the lead developer, said smoothly. "Given the property's potential and your uncle's situation, we feel $6 million would be fair. We can close quickly, handle all the paperwork. Make this whole transition as painless as possible." Emily stared at the renderings, trying to imagine the farm transformed into this vision of suburban prosperity. The old oak tree where she'd spent countless summer afternoons reading would be cut down to make way for a community center. The barn where Jack had shown her the newborn calves would be demolished for a row of townhouses. What about the soil, she heard herself asking. This land has been farmland for generations. The quality of the earth will be properly managed during construction, Coleman assured her. We're very environmentally conscious. Now, if you'll just look at page 3 of our proposal Emily's phone buzzed, a text from Jack. Her heart jumped, expecting more recriminations, but instead it was a photo. Her uncle was awake, giving a weak thumbs up to the camera. Behind him, pinned to the hospital room wall, was one of her grandmother's letters. "Miss Parker." Coleman's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Shall we proceed with the paperwork?" The diner's bell jingled as a group of farmers came in for breakfast. Emily recognized some of them from her childhood, Mr. Henderson, who always brought extra vegetables to her grandmother's kitchen, the Williams sisters, who ran the apple orchard where she'd had her first job. They nodded to her politely, but their eyes were wary. News traveled fast in small towns. She looked back at the developer's proposal, at the neat lines and figures that would erase generations of history. $6 million. Enough to solve all their problems, give Uncle Robert the retirement he deserved, free her from the burden of an aging farm she'd never wanted to manage. "Miss Parker?" Coleman prompted again. "Is everything all right?" Emily opened her mouth to speak, but at that moment, her grandmother's final letter seemed to burn in her memory. "When you read these letters, you'll be facing a choice, one that will test everything you believe about value and worth." The bell above the diner door jingled again. Emily didn't need to look up to know who had just walked in. She could feel Jack's presence like a physical force, could imagine the judgment in his eyes as he saw her sitting with the developers, about to sign away his dream along with her family's legacy. Coleman was holding out a pen, his smile confident and professional. "Shall we make this official?" Emily stared at the pen in Coleman's outstretched hand, feeling the weight of generations pressing down on her shoulders. The diner had grown oddly quiet, as if the whole room was holding its breath. "No," she said softly, then again with more conviction. "No. The farm isn't for sale." Coleman's professional smile flickered. "Miss Parker, I understand this is emotional, but $6 million isn't enough," Emily interrupted, standing up. Her designer heels clicked against the linoleum as she gathered the glossy renderings, handing them back to the stunned developers. "Not for what you're asking us to give up." She felt Jack's presence behind her, but didn't turn around. This moment wasn't about him, or even about her grandmother's letters. It was about finally understanding what she'd been missing all along. Parker Farm isn't just land, she continued, her city-trained voice carrying across the now silent diner. It's a living piece of agricultural history, and it's going to have a future worthy of its past. Coleman's smile had vanished entirely. You're making a mistake. The property taxes alone are my concern, not yours. Emily squared her shoulders, feeling more confident with each word. Thank you for your time, gentlemen, but this meeting is over. She turned and walked out of the diner, past Jack, past the watching farmers, into the bright morning sunlight. Her hands were shaking as she pulled out her phone, but her voice was steady as she made the first of many calls. The next 72 hours passed in a blur of activity. Emily worked with the same intensity she usually reserved for major urban development projects, but this time her skills were focused on saving something, not transforming it. She set up her laptop in the farmhouse kitchen, surrounded by her grandmother's letters and Jack's notebooks. Her corporate contacts were bewildered by her requests, but years of networking paid off. Agricultural investment groups, sustainable farming initiatives, historical preservation societies, she pursued every angle. You're really serious about this, Jack said on the second evening, finding her still working as sunset painted the kitchen windows gold. He set a plate of sandwiches beside her laptop. Did you think I wasn't? Emily looked up, realizing she was still wearing yesterday's clothes. Your plan was good, Jack. But it needed something more, a way to honor the past while building for the future. She showed him the presentations she'd been working on. Parker Farm reimagined as an agricultural education center, partnering with state universities for research programs. The historic barn converted into an event space for farm-to-table dinners and workshops. Heritage crop programs that would preserve traditional farming methods while incorporating modern technology. It's ambitious, Jack admitted, studying the projections. But the startup costs are covered. Emily pulled up another spreadsheet. I've spent the last 2 days talking to impact investors who specialize in agricultural preservation. Add in historical preservation grants, sustainable farming subsidies, and my own investment. She paused, taking a deep breath. I'm selling my condo in the city. Between that and emptying my savings, we can match what would have been my uncle's share of the sale price. Jack stared at her. You do that? Give up everything you've built? I'm not giving up anything, Emily said softly. I'm investing in something bigger than myself. Something my grandmother always knew was possible. She gestured to the business plan on her screen. But I can't do it alone. The farm needs someone who understands the land, who knows how to work it right. Their eyes met across the kitchen table, the same table where her grandmother had written countless letters about hope and legacy and believing in something bigger than profit. Partners? Emily held out her hand, trying to ignore the way her heart raced when Jack's fingers closed around hers. Partners, he agreed, his calloused palm warm against her skin. They worked through the night, refining the plan, combining Jack's agricultural expertise with Emily's business acumen. As dawn broke over the fields, Emily realized she hadn't thought about her city life in hours. The next afternoon, they brought their proposal to Robert's hospital room. Emily's uncle listened quietly as they laid out their vision, his eyes growing brighter with each detail. Your grandmother always said you'd find your way back to the farm, he said when they'd finished. Said it might take time, but Parker blood runs deep. He reached for Emily's hand. She'd be proud of you, Emmy. Both of you. Emily blinked back tears, feeling the rightness of the moment settle into her bones. Through the hospital window, she could see the distant hills where Parker Farm waited, not as a relic to be preserved or an asset to be sold, but as a living, breathing thing ready to grow in new ways. There's one more thing, Jack said, pulling a worn envelope from his pocket. I found this in the barn this morning, tucked away in one of the old ledgers. It's addressed to you, Emily. She recognized her grandmother's handwriting immediately, but this wasn't one of the letters from the shoebox. The envelope was newer, dated just weeks before her grandmother's passing. With trembling fingers, Emily broke the seal, unfolding one final message from the woman who had seen so much further than anyone had realized. 1 year later. The autumn sun hung low over Parker Farm, casting long shadows across the freshly harvested fields. Emily stood on the porch, coffee in hand, watching a line of cars wind their way up the gravel drive. Her grandmother's final letter lay folded in her pocket, its words now memorized but still powerful enough to make her throat tight with emotion. My dearest Emily. If you're reading this, you've already made your choice. I've watched you build walls around your heart, crafting a life of steel and glass, convinced that success can only be measured in dollars and cents. But I've also seen glimpses of the farm girl who once knew the value of things that can't be bought or sold. Jack Morrison came to me last spring with a dream of saving not just our farm, but a way of life. He reminded me so much of your grandfather, that same fire, that same deep understanding that we don't really own the land, we're just its stewards for future generations. I'm leaving you these letters not to burden you with guilt or obligation, but to show you that there are many ways to build a legacy. You have your grandfather's head for business and my stubborn heart, Emmy. Trust them both. The choice was always yours to make. But now that you've made it, know that you're not just saving a farm, you're coming home. All my love. Grandma Margaret. The sound of tires on gravel pulled Emily from her memories. Jack's truck appeared around the bend, hauling extra chairs for today's harvest festival. Their first major event since launching Parker Farm's new chapter, and already they had sold out of tickets. Looking pretty good for a city girl gone country, Jack teased as he climbed out of the truck. His smile still made her heart skip, even after months of working side by side. Just trying to keep up with my partner, she replied, helping him unload the chairs. They worked in comfortable synchronization, the kind that comes from countless shared tasks and challenges. The past year hadn't been easy. There were nights when Emily lay awake, questioning her decision to pour her life savings into ancient machinery in unpredictable weather. Days when the bank's questions seemed endless and the regulatory hurdles insurmountable. Moments when she missed her ordered city life with an intensity that left her breathless. But there were other moments too. The triumph of their first successful heritage wheat harvest. The joy on local children's faces during educational tours. The pride in Uncle Robert's eyes as he taught traditional farming techniques to university students, his health improving with each passing season. The barn, newly renovated but still bearing its historic bones, had become a sought-after venue for farm-to-table events. Local chefs competed for spots at their monthly dinners, featuring ingredients grown in the very fields visible through the restored windows. Emmy. Robert's voice carried across the yard. He was leading a group of investors and agricultural professors on a tour of their new research plots. Come tell them about the soil regeneration project. Emily smiled, remembering how she'd once thought only of the soil's real estate value. Now she could speak for hours about organic content levels and sustainable farming practices. Her business presentations these days were more likely to feature crop yields than property appreciation, but they were no less passionate. The festival guests began arriving, families, farmers, food enthusiasts, all drawn by the promise of experiencing something authentic in an increasingly artificial world. Emily watched Jack demonstrating traditional plowing techniques to an enthusiastic audience, his natural teaching ability shining through. Your grandmother would love this, a voice said beside her. Sarah Henderson, one of the neighboring farmers who'd once watched her suspiciously in the diner, handed her a fresh-baked apple pie. She always said Parker Farm had magic in its soil. She was right, Emily replied, accepting the pie. Though I took a while to see it. The day flowed by in a blur of activity, workshops on heritage farming techniques, tours of their experimental crops, children's activities in the pumpkin patch, and finally, a harvest dinner in the renovated barn. Local musicians played from the hayloft while guests dined on foods grown within sight of their tables. As twilight settled over the farm, Emily found herself back on the porch, watching fireflies dance over the fields. Jack joined her, 2 glasses of local wine in hand. "Penny for your thoughts, partner," he said, passing her a glass. Emily took a sip, letting the familiar warmth spread through her chest. "Just thinking about choices. About what makes a life worth living." She turned to face him. "Thank you for fighting for this place. For helping me see what I almost threw away." Jack's free hand found hers, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. "You did the hard part. You chose to believe in something bigger than yourself." From the barn, they could hear laughter and music drifting out into the night air. The festival guests were dancing now, celebrating the harvest the way communities had done for generations. But among the traditional festivities were signs of the farm's evolution: students documenting sustainable practices, chefs planning future collaborations, investors discussing next season's expansions. Emily reached into her pocket, touching her grandmother's final letter. "She knew, didn't she? Even before I did. That's why she left the letters, why she encouraged your plans." "Margaret Parker was the wisest person I've ever known," Jack said softly. "She understood that some things need to be lost before they can be found again." A cool breeze carried the scent of autumn across the porch, earth and apples, wood smoke and possibilities. Emily leaned against Jack's shoulder, feeling the solid strength that had helped her rebuild not just a farm, but herself. In the distance, an owl called out across the darkening fields. The same fields that had sustained her family for generations, now transformed but not diminished. Fields that would continue to tell their story to future generations, thanks to choices made and unmade, to letters written and read, to love lost and found again in unexpected places. Emily Parker, who had once measured success in square footage and profit margins, stood in the gathering darkness and knew with unshakable certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. The city girl who'd come to sell her heritage had found something far more valuable: she'd found her way home.